All right, guys, back again. We got another episode of Consumed, and this one isn't going to be kind of talking about a specific article that I read over the week, but I have been getting a lot of direct messages, a lot of social media activity, and people are trying to figure out my opinion on kind of the tariff situation, the trade war, as some people kind of talk about it as, and specifically surrounding how that's going to affect consumer packaged goods, and then kind of even further on that, the categories that I focus on being at functional foods, functional beverages, and then nutritional supplements. So, I've been a little bit hesitant in responding publicly about any of these types of things because I don't think I'm the authority on the subject. I'm definitely not a practicing economist in any sense of the imagination, though I've had quite a bit of economics courses through undergrad and graduate courses. This is just something that I follow because I'm interested in kind of macro trends and micro trends in the industries that I care about. So though I might not be the authority on these things, I probably have a pretty educated opinion on these things. But I also, I don't really want to kind of get too far into the weeds about this. I don't want to kind of talk about, what this means to the consumer from, inflation and how, maybe the Federal Reserve needs to respond to that over the next couple of quarters. I don't want to get into that. That's just too much nuances for this video. But one other thing that I'd like to probably mention is that my ideologies on just commerce in general is probably going to bias this video a little bit. I'm definitely a free market capitalist, though I believe in a small amount of kind of regulation just to make sure you balance certain inefficiencies. Overall, I believe creating the least amount of barriers to global free trade is kind of the best way to do it. So though I might not 100% agree with some of the current rhetoric that's going on in kind of the news, in kind of the financial news. It is what it is. At this point, we have to kind of understand what that means to the industry that we care about. And this is kind of that video for this. So before I get into just how this is going to affect maybe some general CPG categories, I do want to make sure you guys know the bulk of this video later on is going to be about kind of nutritional supplement, CPG, and there's a main reason why, but I want to make sure I cover the kind of just some general areas of consumer packaged goods right now first. Just overall, tariffs and how they're affecting consumer packaged goods, certain categories that maybe people are most interested in. The biggest one and probably the most obvious one that people can point to is anything that's canned, anything that's aluminum. So if you think about that, energy drinks or even going a little bit outside of the categories that I care about, general sodas or beer or anything like that, those things with the increased tariff on aluminum, you're definitely going to see those prices increase. And even I think Pepsi and Coke and a few other or major manufacturers have already kind of went out and said, hey, there is going to be a price increase that's coming. So, that's not anything that we can kind of debate at this point. That is definitely something that's going to affect, the industry. One of the, I guess some of the food elements that I don't really have the answers for, but I can just kind of assume what's going to happen is one is dairy. So, I think we send a lot of dairy over to China, and if they're not really going to be a buyer on that anymore, our domestic kind of supply demand pricing and everything, I think it's ultimately going to decrease the price a little bit. I don't know how that's going to affect kind of whey prices or anything, but if it does move along with the dairy market domestically and this kind of goes over time, I would probably guess that prices are going to go down. Similarly, I think meat is pretty similar to that. I don't, that's not too much included into consumer packaged goods because most of that's fresh, but I do think that the price of kind of beef and poultry and pork and everything will decrease a little bit. And then just kind of any consumer packaged good that has a lot of elements to it, be it having grains and different vegetables and fruits and all that kind of stuff. If it has a multiple amount of kind of ingredients in it, I would expect that to go up because the basket overall is probably going to increase because the complexity of getting certain items from certain areas might increase over time. So, all right, like I said, guys, I mean, the bulk of this video, I mean, I'd like to probably focus on like the dietary supplement industry. And why I think it is going to potentially be hit the worst is because the industry is extremely fragmented. There's a lot of small and medium-sized businesses that have a good collective of market share. And unfortunately, with anything that happens to types of like price spikes or any type of economic kind of uncertainty, small and medium-sized businesses unfortunately get affected the most, just because of just their resources, their ability to hedge, just a lot of different things. So, because of how the industry overall is comprised, I believe that, unfortunately, the nutritional supplement industry could see a good like amount of effect that's coming from these tariffs. One of the reasons is because a lot of the raw materials that come to become finished goods and manufactured in the U.S. Do come from China. So, we're going to see a lot of maybe effects on that. I think recently I saw maybe an article that just talked about a few kind of ingredients at this point. Nothing that was, all that big. But, if we continue this kind of like tit for tat type of approach with increasing tariffs, I can't imagine why over time there's going to be a good majority of ingredients that go into dietary supplements that would be kind of affected. And just on the flip side of that, and the protectionist kind of like ideology in general is because they want to increase domestic output or increase domestic manufacturing. The unfortunate thing about it is with the supply needs in the market for a lot of these dietary ingredients, unfortunately, domestically in the short term, the manufacturing here would not be able to handle that. So there would be an obvious price increase that would be kind of balanced through the supply and demand, and it would ultimately affect a lot of those small and medium-sized businesses that obviously didn't hedge and buy ingredients and different things like that ahead of time. I speak specifically about small and medium-sized businesses not hedging their bets or hedging their procurement on some of these commodities. But I would guess, even though Trump has been big on protectionism for decades, I think a lot of people thought when he came into office that he would be very pro-business, which I think outside of trade he has been. So I'm not sure if a lot of people were aggressively making sure they were hedging a lot of their commodity costs or expecting certain things like this to happen. So it could affect even more brands than I originally kind of was speaking about. So what does this kind of mean? Obviously, through the process of increasing your cost of goods because of the raw material costs increasing, that's ultimately going to create a ripple effect with pricing of brands. So, the price that you're getting the product for, or buying the product from your contract manufacturer or your own manufacturing, is going to increase a little bit. You're obviously going to pass those costs on to either your wholesalers or your retail partners or your direct-to-consumer site or anything like that. Some of those channels maybe will be affected less, just because there's a lot more margin baked into them. But I think over time, if increases continue to happen and kind of the trade tariffs continue to increase over time because of the rhetoric back and forth, ultimately it's going to have to increase along with some of these more established names in CPG that kind of already have increased their prices or are increasing their prices over 2018. So ultimately, this is going to probably hit the end consumer's pocket. Prices have been pretty consistent over time in the dietary supplement market. Some people could argue that the quality or the formulation costs have went down while some other things have remained consistent. So, obviously that's a different discussion. But to take this like maybe a little bit a step further would be, naturally in kind of a capitalistic economy like the United States, smart people generally don't sit around for long and wait for people in regulatory states and things to dictate their future. And what does that mean, and what could you do? One of the things would be to move manufacturing over to another country. I believe that I read in terms of some of the tariffs, the finished goods are not really included in the tariff list. So, you could hypothetically go and manufacture over in China or some other country and bring the product back to you, and hypothetically it could be cheaper than getting it manufactured in the United States with using raw materials that are getting exported from China over to the United States. Another way could be, with reformulating products. Right now the tariff list of ingredients I think are pretty small, but like I said, in the future you just don't know. So if certain ingredients are, obviously increased 10, 15, 25% year over year, you're obviously not going to use those ingredients anymore. Or if you do and use those ingredients, you're going to use them in a very smaller quantity. So maybe from a formulation standpoint, people are going to change that to make sure they can balance to meet profitability goals. And then lastly, I think has to do with probably some of the promotional marketing or channel kind of strategies. If you are going to have a lower gross margin because of increased costs from raw materials, you're not going to be able to pass on a lot of those sales promotions to maybe even some of your wholesalers or some of your retail partners. You might aggressively more focus on direct to consumer or some other areas where you have a higher gross margin. There's just a lot of different areas that companies will shift to. Business is about how fast you can adapt to different things, and I don't think that the smart people that are in consumer packaged goods will sit on their hands for long and say, this is what's going to happen. But right now, I think, and why I was a little bit hesitant to make this video at all was, this is an ever-changing thing. A lot of the stuff that's getting discussed in the financial news is not actually even in place right now. Like I said, there's a lot of rhetoric going back and forth from Trump and Xi and all of that, and even other countries that are kind of getting affected by some of this trade talk with unilateral agreements. So, we'll see. I mean, if things kind of change materially, I'll definitely make sure that I update this. But if you guys want to follow along more closely, I would say make sure you guys are following me on my social media. All the links are down below. And that's where I kind of will definitely share a lot more articles on a kind of a quicker pace, just because as things change, it's easier just to share a couple sentences over creating a whole 10 or 15-minute video. But I want to thank you guys for listening. If you guys do have questions or comments, or if you are the expert on this, let's talk a little bit more through the comments or reach out to me through email. If you guys have stuck around this long, make sure you guys give me a thumbs up. If you guys like the content, it helps me understand what you guys like and what you guys don't like. Make sure you guys subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys on the next one.